Welcome friends to another Dune video. Today we look at the Fremen Naib, or leader of a Sietch or community. We will look at their position in the community, how they interact with other leaders within it, and go over notable leaders such as Paul Atreides. Spoilers for the Dune Encyclopedia and Dune throughout. Let's get straight into it. The pressures of the group carry authority amongst the Fremen, so any figure that carries it, namely the Naib, must comply with the understanding and decision-making of that group. He was a voice and was in service to the tribe, but did not directly command the people within it. Within a sietch, no policing is needed to make sure people comply. Everyone has their role to play and must do it for the good of the tribe. Going against these norms was rare, and even then would be handled by the family unit. For example, as the Dune Encyclopedia states, the mother of a shamed family would have her child put to death if he or she were possessed or mad. To be Fremen was to know your duty, and the Naib did not need to define that to anyone. Amongst the former Zinsuni, authority was about respect and the power that was held within a personal community message. Paddock Kynes was an example of this. He unified the tribes into one vision and did this not by forcing what he believed on people. He was an outsider and communicated the message through respect for their way of life. His vision of changing the ecology of the planet Dune would allow the Fremen to change while still meeting the essential parts of their social order. He persuaded them of the benefits of his message. Each sietch maintains independence under its own Naib. The leader has to hold to the ideal virtues of the community, Stilgar being one example of this. As the Dune Encyclopedia says, his strength, moral certitude, and total devotion to Sietch Tabr comes through forcefully. He obeyed the necessities of tribal preservation and evaluated all possibilities in terms of his duty to his people. When he did make a decision from long experience in Arrakis, the way of deciding was so firmly established that any Fremen who served as Naib would come to that same choice. The Naib mainly would have to make sure water and security was provided for his sietch. These two duties bound up all other needs within them. A Naib can be challenged in combat, as nearly happened between Paul and Stilgar, but such a challenge to remove a leader had to be preceded by a vote of no confidence, so only when a Naib makes a mistake and is not properly carrying out his duties is the challenge made. No male would challenge whilst the leader remained good. When he did falter, a challenger gained popular support and would then be able to call out the Naib. Those who challenged were men of stature within the sietch, who had both qualities of leadership and a deep commitment and understanding of the Fremen way of life. They could not only be the best fighters, but men who could guide the tribe in and through its day-to-day struggles. Within every sietch is a council of wise men, and they advise the Naib. They have influence, but not authority. They do, however, deeply embody the shared myths of the Fremen. All Fremen share that deep sense of grief over their history. The council's interpretation is usually listened to by the Naib. The Naib's position and the council own experience in the sietch, meaning they came to the same conclusion frequently. Before the council itself, all Fremen could speak. Things that spoke to the collective will of the Fremen gained the most influence. A speaker would try to link what they wanted with the traditions of the Fremen. Paul Muad'Dib was able to sway the council and get them to break with tradition by tapping into that common grief of the Fremen. We will now go over a short section from the original Dune novel which covers what I've just mentioned. Paul swept a hard gaze across the throng. Who is there here to say I'm not the rightful ruler on Arrakis? Must I prove it by leaving every Fremen tribe in the Erg with a leader? Beside Paul, Stilgar stirred, looked at him questioningly. Will I subtract from our strength when we need it most? Paul asked. I am your ruler, and I say to you that it is time we stopped killing off our best men and started killing our real enemies, the Harkonnens. In one blood motion, Stilgar had his crysknife out and pointed over the heads of the throng. "Long live Duke Paul Muad'Dib," he shouted. A deafening roar filled the cavern, echoed and re-echoed. This brings us to the role of the Reverend Mother in the Sietch. She, as the Dune Encyclopedia says, wielded the authority of history. She was in contact with all Fremen who came before her. Not the Naib or the Council could go against her wisdom. She would establish a framework which others would make decisions within. She did not work against the Naib or Council either, for to go against them would be to go against the Sietch or community. Each part of this authoritative structure carried the function of preserving the Fremen way of life on Arrakis. Each Sietch worked to keep its independence, but also coordinate with others when their struggles were common. Under the leadership of the Mahdi, the Lisan al-Gaib, the Council was able to bring together the forces that put an end to their oppressors. After this, the leadership structure that had worked for so long all fell under the Atreides and was changed. The absolute rulership of Paul and the regency that followed was what was in charge after that point. Now, friends, I turn this over to you. What do you think to the Fremen power structure? Do you feel Paul should have maintained it under his rule? Have you been a leader of a Sietch on Arrakis? Comment down below.